Hey everyone, welcome back to the hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we'll be talking about spoofed RGB software, stealing crypto wallet information and cryptocurrency account credentials. I'll also be talking about Steam's hardware survey showing a continued surge for AMD Ryzen CPU popularity among Steam's user base, and the RTX 3060 exists, apparently, on Steam hardware survey now. We'll also be going over IBM's 2nm Nanosheet process technology advancements, and a couple of other stories from the industry like DDR5, again, as it approaches some form of mass production for end of this year. Before that, this video is brought to you by Corsair and their 5000D airflow. The Corsair 5000D airflow is an ATX tower with high material build quality and a focus on cooling performance, with attention paid to small details. The case has a unique look with deeply indented cooling pathways on the sides of the front and top panels, and has carefully matched colors across the case, available in both white and black. Learn more at the link in the description below. So the first one, just quickly, you may have noticed we have a new intro, and actually there's a new outro we're trying out as well. That was done by Andrew on the team. He did the original 3D animation for the intro and outro several years ago, and we at the time built a 5 GPU system. It was all 1080 Ti's, and it took 1 week to render that original outro and intro animation each at just 120 frames. It was about 1 week for 120 frames for that intro originally. And now we're using some more modern technology just a few years later to render it all in real time. So now we're at about 2 seconds to 1 second, nearly real time on the renders. But anyway, just bringing that up because it relates to the technology we cover, to CPUs, GPUs, software utilization of those components. And if you all are interested in seeing more of the behind the scenes of how it all works and the types of systems we do the animations on, or the software side of things, please leave a comment below and let us know that you're interested and what aspect you're interested in. So more look at the software, which by the way was Unreal Engine and Blender. So we used Eevee for some of it. We used Unreal Engine for a lot of it, like particle generation. But let us know below if you're interested in seeing more behind the scenes on that. And then additionally, we have some wallpapers available. So for a couple of years now, you all have been asking us for wallpapers because you've seen them in the backgrounds of our own shoots and on the systems we work with. And we never really distributed any, but we decided to go ahead and make some available just to get them out there. But thank you for the interest. To those of you who've wanted to even have one on your desktop background, that's an honor for us. So there's a free wallpaper pack linked in the description below. We have 16:9 and 21:9. I think Andrew might have put in mobile ones as well, but if not, we'll add them at some point. And then we also have a Patreon only one. It's just some extra wallpapers, different colors, variations, things like that. And these were all made in Blender as well, by the way. And these were slowly rendered because they are massive file sizes. But if you're a Patreon backer on patreon.com/gamersnexus, we're making an extra pack available to you. It'll be on the Patreon page as a post. You can download it, and 16:9, 21:9 are in there for sure. And then it's for all tiers. It's just a thank you for supporting us. And of course, if you'd like to join on Patreon, you'll get access to other things like behind the scenes videos. And we have a couple of those going up actually over this weekend. We'll have some behind the scenes videos, Patrons Ask GN, and of course the wallpaper pack. And all of that funding goes towards our testing efforts and our in-depth coverage. So thank you for making that possible. But there's a free pack available as well if you'd like to grab that. Okay, so the first news story is about the spoofed RGB software that steals crypto wallets and cryptocurrency account credentials. So this we saw pop up in a new chain of tweets from Confiant Intel, or Confiant, we're gonna go with Confiant, on Twitter. We've learned of a malicious lookalike software spoofing MSI's Dragon Center and Afterburner specifically. To be very clear, Dragon Center and Afterburner, other than whatever other issues they may have, for this specific exploit are not, as we understand it, compromised. It's lookalikes that are spoofing Dragon Center and Afterburner. So it's not specifically Dragon Center and Afterburner as they are legitimately distributed, barring whatever other existing issues they may have. So this is being done through misleading URLs, and to anyone familiar, these should look sketchy and hopefully reduce the likelihood of being clicked immediately. But in short, if it's not explicitly MSI.com in this instance, and it has some other hyphenated phrase or odd TLD, top-level domain like .io or .space, then don't click on it. The problem, though, is because it's being delivered through advertising, which is a common attack vector for malware, it's a little bit harder to determine from a glance if it's legitimate or not. There's a quote from Confined Intel on Twitter where they said the following: users are redirected to a chain of fake MSI-themed websites. We've redacted those websites in this coverage, though. They say it offers users to download MSI Dragon Center and Afterburner. The download links are pointing to a malware hosted in Discord's CDN. They say Discord CDN servers are heavily used to host malware, targeting a large number of users. It is a new variant, Redline Info Stealer, with additional features. Confined continued to say the following, quote, this variant was configured to steal cold cryptocurrency wallets like Electrum, Exodus, Jax, etc., and VPN profiles, and it came with a new remote task command, or CMD, allowing backdoor access and executing further commands on the host's hands-on keyboard attacks. And this type of scam is likely going to become more common. Our general advice here is not to install weird software in general on your machine, especially if you're dealing with cryptocurrency and especially if it's in large amounts. Unfortunately, in this instance, it has the appearance of legitimate software if you fall for it, if you get that far, but the trick is not falling for it. So in general, if you're dealing with large amounts of cryptocurrency or any currency, like banking information as well, probably have a reserved PC for that where you don't install weird things, don't click through the sketchy URLs, so that you have more assurance that it's clean. And at that point, if it's not on an isolated network, your primary attack vector would be via the network, and those are less common. So general advice is to avoid putting weird software on machines that deal with money. And that goes for banks too, because a really common attack right now in the brokerage and real estate industry is to occupy an email account and stay quiet until there's some form of wire transfer request that comes through, and then the attacker will spoof the recipient, and then the money is gone. There's no way to get that back. So both of those common attacks, but cryptocurrency in particular will be very common going forward given the current market. Okay, Steam's hardware survey for April 2021. This has been updated from last month, which we covered. And with another month coming and going, there's one thing with Steam's hardware survey that we've really seen change, and that's the GPU stack, sort of. There's a bit of change in the CPUs as well, but it's mostly continuing change. So first and foremost, this is the first month that NVIDIA's RTX 3060 has broken into the Steam charts, indicating that the card does actually exist, and at least a few actual customers got their hands on it. The elusive RTX 3060 appears toward the bottom of the list, sandwiched between NVIDIA's GTX 970M and Intel's Sandy Bridge iGPU, with a mere 0.17% share. The other interesting point is that months after the initial Radeon RX 6800 and XT launch, there's still no presence of AMD's 6000 series cards on the Steam charts. AMD is faring better in the realm of CPUs, though, as it continues to chew away at Intel's market share. AMD now holds a share of 29.48%, leaving Intel with the remaining 70.5%. The top GPUs going back to video cards are mostly unchanged. The GTX 1060 still leads the way all these years later, albeit the card has continued to lose share for months now. It was actually at one point closer to 20% utilization on Steam's hardware survey, but it's fallen far, as you would expect. So far, it's at a 0.19 point share loss for April of 2021. And back in CPU land, quad-core CPUs at 40.77% are still king for Steam's hardware survey, but their days are numbered because the 6-core CPUs are rising at this point, approaching a 30% mark. This is a trend we've been highlighting in these surveys for some time now, and it's a continuing trend, and it makes sense. The R5 series of CPUs has been a top recommendation from our outlet and other outlets for years now. And Intel, with its newer i5s, has also gotten into 6 cores as more of a mainstream gamer setup. So this trend is one that is pretty obvious. As for operating systems, Windows now commands a 96.27% share, a gain of 0.10 points, leaving macOS and Linux to fight over the remaining 3%. And as a reminder, of course, there is going to be sample bias here, data bias, by Steam, the entity that's collecting the information. So you're more likely to see a high saturation of Windows systems on a gaming platform because games are still primarily targeted at Windows users. Mac would maybe be the second choice there. But for Linux, if you took a poll of servers, it would be a completely opposite story. So keep that in mind. Doesn't mean the OS is is unused, it means that it's not as heavily used here for this user base. IBM creating its first chip built, actually the first chip, built on 2nm nanosheet process technology. It's pretty interesting. It's completely out of left field. So IBM, despite not being the entity it once was in the industry, it's not the major computing and actually storage driver that it used to be. It's still big in research, and it plays a big role there. So IBM announced that it has produced the first chip using a 2nm process technology based on nanosheets. You'll likely recognize the word nanosheets if you've seen some of our other videos, because we've had a continued discussion surrounding nanosheet FETs in the news topics and how they'll eventually, in theory, replace FinFETs. Before getting into the details, this is the part where we insert the disclaimer regarding the growing disconnect between node names and the actual size of the transistors and the features on the chip. So while IBM is describing this as a 2nm chip, there's no metric that clearly defines what IBM is calling 2nm. It's not unified. For a primer on how node names and transistor measurements and density have become increasingly decoupled, you can check out a research paper on the proposed LMC density metric. This is one we've reported on a few times, and it's an interesting industry topic, and the white papers behind all of this stuff are not really useful for a PC enthusiast standpoint, but very useful from a knowledge and learning standpoint. That aside, IBM's recent breakthrough is no less impressive. IBM has been toying with stacked nanosheets since at least 2017, as far as actual designs anyway, and that's when it introduced nanosheet designs at 5nm. IBM is claiming that with its 2nm design using nanosheets, up to 50 billion transistors could be packed onto one chip the size of a fingernail. IBM notes that its 2nm design is capable of either a 45% performance improvement or a 75% reduction in power consumption compared to today's 7nm silicon. IBM is also highlighting a few things that it thinks the research can mean in end-user products. Those things include quadrupling the battery life of smartphones, reducing the carbon footprint of data centers, which is a growing problem, and increasing the performance in laptops, and also improved detection and reaction in autonomous vehicles. Via Anantex reporting, IBM also showed images with GAA or nanosheet transistors using a stack of 3 nanosheets with a gate length of 12nm. IBM notes that with EUV patterning, it can achieve nanosheet widths varying between 15nm and 70nm. IBM's research will go forward to benefit partners like GlobalFoundries and Samsung, as well as Intel, as the latter has recently announced it would be collaborating with IBM in R&D. Up next, more DDR5 news. We've been talking about DDR5 the last couple of months now on and off, but it's starting to ramp as a discussion point because at this point it looks like DDR5 is expected to arrive for second half of the year, which makes sense given the platform advancements from Intel landing around that time. And Kingston is the latest to talk about this via its subdivision HyperX. HyperX is a brand owned by Kingston. Previously, we've talked about TeamGroup and Crucial, both showing in one form or another, intentional or unintentional, their DDR5 modules coming up. Kingston and HyperX specifically pointed out that the new modules it's preparing for Q3 of 2021 are overclocking enabled, if not targeted at least. And it did this by saying it has sent some overclocking-focused DDR5 modules to its motherboard partners for QVL validation. Kingston noted that the modules are likely due in Q3 of 2021, and it said that it remains the largest third-party manufacturer in the world, claiming via TrendForce an 80% market share. Now, we're not sure how accurate that number is. It depends on how you measure it. Corsair has, as far as we've known, been the closest competitor in our space that Kingston has had to battle, but it's likely that Kingston's dominance comes from its presence in enterprise and OEM systems, especially as you look outside of the US as a region. Kingston said that the DDR5 modules it's working on have XMP and allow motherboard manufacturers to, quote, adjust the power management integrated circuit, or PMIC, beyond 1.1 volts, which is the DDR5 spec. And all that really means is that you can overvolt it, which makes sense because if you're overclocking it, you need more voltage to stabilize it. So that's not really a surprise. But it allows full overclocking. Some more discussion on D5. And the biggest thing here that's interesting is just the date of HyperX targeting Q3 of 2021. Intel has said that Alder Lake and some of its other technologies are slated for second half of 21. So all these timelines line up and make sense. Next one, TSMC. Using AMD's Epyc CPU to help power its manufacturing. This is sort of like the story of the circle of silicon life for this one, because what's happening is TSMC is now looking to use chips that it has produced for a customer in its own processes for producing chips for said customer and other customers. So it's a full circle of AMD Epyc CPUs. Interesting piece put out by AMD and TSMC jointly, where they talk about how TSMC has performed case studies internally on AMD's Epyc CPUs, and apparently they've gone well because TSMC is now using those in its production systems. The piece points out that TSMC began testing AMD Epyc CPUs in its general workloads for its data centers some time ago. Additionally, following the general testing, TSMC noted that AMD's Epyc CPUs are now being deployed with its research and development teams. TSMC is currently using HPE's ProLiant DL325G10 servers configured with AMD's 64-core Epyc 7702P. TSMC notes that each of its production tools is linked to an x86 virtual machine, and the company uses Path Alternation Protocol, or PAP, software to ensure redundancy. That is, in the event a virtual machine goes down, the PAP software will automatically reconnect a production tool to another virtual machine in the cluster. There's a quote from TSMC's Simon Wan, the Director of Infrastructure and Communication, where Mr. Wan said the following: "For automation with the machinery inside our fab, each machine needs to have one x86 server to control the operation speed and provision of water, electricity, and gas, or power consumption. These machines are very costly. They might cost billions of dollars, but the servers that control them are much cheaper. I need to make sure that we have high availability in case one rack is down. Then we can use another rack to support the machine. With a standard building block, I can generate about 1,000 virtual machines, which can control 1,000 fab tools in our clean room." Now, while obviously an Epyc-based server isn't particularly cheap for normal people, if you're TSMC, it is cheap. And the reason it's cheap to a company like TSMC is pretty obvious, but it's opportunity cost, it's time cost, and it's cost to machine a product. So if you look at a much simpler sector of the industry, like CNC and water blocks or cold plates, for example, the time it takes to CNC, say, a liquid nitrogen pot versus a CPU water block is way out of proportion. And so the liquid nitrogen pot needs to cost more. It's just basic economies of scale. It takes more machine time to produce that LN2 pot, where maybe they could produce 2 or 3 CPU blocks in the same time, and so they don't need to sell them for as much. So the machine time here is what costs the most. If you have machines that cost billions of dollars, and you've got a server that costs whatever, $20,000 or something that goes down. Not sure what they actually spent on theirs, but let's say 20 to 100 grand, depending on the complexity of the RAM and everything else in there. If you have one of those go down, and you have machines that cost billions that are sitting idle, that's the big cost, not the server itself. So interesting stuff. Kind of neat to see some of the CPUs that TSMC has made go full circle. Next one is on Intel, looking for $9.7 billion in subsidies, and it's making more fab investments worldwide. So a couple of weeks ago, Reuters reported that Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, was slated to travel to Europe to meet with the European Union officials and customers, presumably to explore options for a new fab site that's part of Intel's new IDM 2.0 strategy. The net result of Gelsinger's visit to Europe is that Intel is now seeking about $9.7 billion in subsidies to construct new European fabs. Quote, "What we're asking from both the US and the European governments is to make it competitive for us to do it here compared to in Asia." And this was to Politico Europe by Pat Gelsinger. Gelsinger also made a stop in Germany, where he met with Economy Minister Peter Altmaier and Bavarian Governor Markus Söder, and pointed to the idea of Germany being a prime spot for a new Intel fab. Gelsinger said to Politico, quote, "We think of Germany as a good candidate, not the only, but a good candidate, for where we might build our fabrication capabilities." Previously, we learned that Gelsinger also met with executives from BMW, Deutsche Telekom, which is a German telecom company, and Volkswagen. Outside of Europe, though, Intel also announced that it will be investing $3.5 billion into its Rio Rancho campus in New Mexico in the US. The investments will allow Intel to expand and upfit the facility to bolster the manufacturing of Intel's advanced 3D packaging technologies, namely Foveros. Foveros was the only technology explicitly mentioned in Intel's press release, but it would follow that perhaps EMIB would be included there as well. Now, the increased investments will strictly focus on post-production capabilities and packaging. Anatech additionally confirmed with Intel that, quote, Intel has confirmed to Anatech that the facility is aimed purely at building its advanced 3D packaging and testing facilities for end products, rather than R&D into some of Intel's other on-site activities, such as 3D XPoint, which had been postulated in the media from Dr. Ian Cutress on Anatech. The expansion is slated to begin later this year, with an expected completion date targeted for late 2022. ARM co-founder still not convinced, to big surprise, that NVIDIA can remain a neutral owner of ARM if the deal goes through. Quick recap, NVIDIA and ARM have agreed to an acquisition whereby NVIDIA would acquire ARM. However, as we've stated, this is pending regulatory body approval in various governments. Basically, the world is the obstacle to the rest of the acquisition. And the primary issue brought up recently is relating to NVIDIA's Grace, which is a CPU we talked about not too long ago. NVIDIA working with ARM without the ownership yet being official, created a new CPU called Grace that's targeted for things like server use, deep learning, enterprise. And that CPU relies heavily on NVLink as its marketing point. NVLink being NVIDIA's proprietary interconnect that would give it a leg up on its competitors. So this is the chief concern here. It's a feature that we pointed to before as being a little bit suspect, given NVIDIA's continued promises to compete fairly should it be allowed to acquire ARM. So another person who found this to be looking a little sus is co-founder Herman Hauser, who sees this situation through a similar lens. In speaking with The Telegraph, Hauser expressed concern that NVIDIA baking in a proprietary interconnect, and one that's notably faster than other technologies, into its ARM design is proof that it will not be competing on even ground, and is a thinly veiled attempt to steer customers toward NVIDIA products. In response to Hauser's comments, NVIDIA told The Telegraph that Hauser, quote, does not understand what Grace will do or its benefits to ARM, and that, quote, we've been working on Grace using off-the-shelf ARM technology available to all ARM licensees long before we agreed to acquire ARM. Now, this comment about Hauser not understanding what Grace will do is dismissive of Hauser's contributions. Being a co-founder of ARM, probably understands it, probably has a pretty good idea. It's also tone deaf, and it's a dangerously aggressive stance for NVIDIA to take when it's already facing enough obstacles to get approved to begin with. It doesn't need to be taking shots at the people who are opposing it publicly, especially when it's going to look like NVIDIA's punching down in this instance. So anyway, we'll see how this advances, but NVLink is an advantage that NVIDIA would have, and we do believe the second part of NVIDIA's statement about them probably working with ARM prior to the acquisition was agreed to. It doesn't mean it was prior to it being considered, though. Next one. Sony announcing Discord integration for PlayStation beginning 2022, suspiciously following the cancellation of the rumor, at least, that Microsoft would be spending $10 billion to acquire Discord. That ended up not being true, at least as we understand it right now. There's also discussion of Discord potentially going public and doing an IPO, and this might fit in better with that. So on the heels of those Microsoft reports previously, Sony has announced an actual partnership, it's not a rumor, with Discord, and it's to bring some level of integration to PlayStation consoles. So neither Sony nor Discord at this point have offered full details on what exactly is going on, how the partnership will work, nor exactly how much Discord functionality will be pulled over to the PlayStation. But Sony did mention that its teams were, quote, hard at work connecting Discord with your social and gaming experience on PlayStation Network. Additionally, Sony said that, quote, our goal is to bring the Discord and PlayStation experiences closer together on console and mobile starting early next year, allowing friends, groups, and communities to hang out, have fun, and communicate more easily while playing games together. Now, Microsoft does offer fairly basic levels of integration with Discord. Users right now can link their Discord and Xbox accounts to display what games are being played, but Sony appears to suggest that there's more, like chat and maybe even cross-platform capabilities between Discord and Sony's networks. Interestingly enough, Sony announced this partnership just as it bought a minority stake in the company as part of Discord's Series H round of funding, so not a big surprise. This is also amidst rumors that Discord is planning to go public with an IPO, which at this point is looking more likely. Up next is a report on TSMC, so some industry news about the silicon side of the industry, and it's about TSMC's multiple Arizona expansions being planned here. So around a year ago, TSMC announced that it was planning a $12 billion mega fab, and that would be built in Arizona, and it would focus on TSMC's 5-nanometer technology process. Construction was set to begin this year with the 2024 completion date target. Not too long ago, we also pointed out that TSMC has already begun hiring for its new Arizona campus, and we bring all of this up because there's a new report from Reuters claiming that TSMC is planning to build, quote, several more chip-making factories in Arizona, in addition to the one previously announced. According to Reuters, TSMC is planning up to 5 more fabs in Arizona, and in TSMC's latest earnings report, the CEO, C.C. Wei, commented on the future Arizona site, saying, quote, "But in fact, we have acquired a large piece of land in Arizona to provide flexibility. So further expansion is possible, but we'll ramp up to phase 1 first, then based on operation efficiency and cost economics, and also the customer's demand, we'll decide what the next steps are going to be." Up next, Dell patching a driver update package security vulnerability that has been present since about 2009, still pending. A patch for Dell's ethics for sneaking in charges into pre-built system purchases. We have a different story on that. That'll be another video for another time. But we recently ordered a pre-built, and aside from the service charges we've already discussed, there's another charge that snuck in there that we didn't notice until recently, which was about $68, and it was for some other BS that we'll talk about separately. But it wasn't a charge that we wanted. Dell just snuck it in there. Anyway, we hope they patch that at some point too, but that seems unlikely. As evidence from research done by Sentinel Labs, Dell's update driver version 2.3 or dbutil_2_3.sys suffers from 5 previously undisclosed vulnerabilities. Dell's firmware updater has been in use with Dell machines running Windows since at least 2009, meaning that these security issues have persisted unnoticed for some 12 years. The 5 security flaws discussed by Sentinel Labs consist of 2 memory corruption issues, 2 lack of input validation issues, and 1 code logic issue. All 5 vulnerabilities have been assigned 1 CVE tracking number, which is CVE 2021-21551, and they're marked with a CVSS score of 8.8. Sentinel Labs notes that all of the aforementioned security flaws can be exploited to gain kernel-level privileges. Dell lists the vulnerabilities and its mitigations on a website, but Dell is instructing users to remove the vulnerable dbutil_2.3 sys driver and download Dell's remediated dbutil driver instead. The last couple of weeks, there's been a hot topic about storage and storage prices potentially going up as scarcity potentially goes up because we're all now Chia farmers, farming for Chia pets on Chia plots and storage devices. I think that's how it works. We're not really quite clear on it. But we've already reported on AData seeing as much as 400 to 500% increases in sales as a result of the demand from this cryptocurrency Chia, quote-unquote, farming. And it's semantics, really, but functionally mining on a hard drive. And TeamGroup now, like other storage product makers, has dollar signs in its eyes. We suspect at some point those dollar signs in the eyes of storage companies will turn into surprised Pikachu faces because this doesn't seem sustainable. Actually, it already looked pretty bad from the launch of Chia from what we saw so far. But all of that aside, TeamGroup is the first company to trot out a storage product, an SSD in this case, specifically aimed at Chia farming. TeamGroup's T-Create Expert SSD is a PCIe Gen 3 SSD of the M.2 variety. And as far as we know, it marks the industry's first 12-year warranty. It's actually pretty genuinely impressive. That's a good thing to come out of all of this for sure. This caters even more to prospective Chia farmers. TeamGroup also lists an MTBF of 3 million hours and a TBW rating of up to 12,000 terabytes. Those ratings are well into enterprise SSD territory, so we would expect at this point that this product will probably double, even if it's maybe renamed or something, as an enterprise product because it fits the bill in just about every spec for the most part. TeamGroup did not disclose any details on the NAND type or the controller at this time. It did, however, say that the SSD will come in capacities of 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes. That's it for this one. If you want to grab one of the free wallpapers, we'll have them linked below. Otherwise, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus if you'd like to get some extras and behind-the-scenes videos. We are shooting a couple. Actually, today they'll be up over the weekend with Patrick Stone talking about some of the power supply testing we've been doing as we ramp into our Gigabyte research piece. And you can subscribe for more as always, or go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to grab one of our mod mats, our mouse mats, or our other popular items. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.